Greetings everyone, welcome to my channel. It has come to my attention that a channel named World Astrology Report presents claims that astrology is a valid system for predicting and explaining human behavior and events. These claims will be examined thoroughly and evaluated against empirical evidence. The objective of this analysis is to show what's true. Let's begin.
Astrology is everywhere. Millions believe in it, but the academics and scientists who get to define what's real and what's nonsense treat it like a joke. But if it doesn't work, then why is it taken seriously by some of the world's most powerful people?
For starters, he used two logical fallacies: the appeal to celebrity and the bandwagon fallacy. The appeal to celebrity simply states that the claim is true just because a famous or powerful person believes in it, and the bandwagon fallacy states that the claim is true just because a lot of people believe in it. And also, scientists don't dictate something as true just because they feel like it or because they want to hide the fact that astrology is real. They just have evidence to support their position.
An astrologer in the 21st century can be a little lonely, because astrology occupies a weird position in society today. It's simultaneously very popular, but it's also held in very low esteem by the intellectual layer of society. In particular, it's despised by the institutions and agents of both science and religion. The scientists and their skeptic hangers-on think astrologers are just frauds and charlatans, and the churchmen think we're doing the work of the devil.
I believe in this section of the video the content creator frames astrology as a uniquely marginalized group by both the church and the scientific community, and that this fact somehow supports astrology as a science. This is simply not true. And also, I believe it's a bit hyperbolic to use the word despised. Astrology is not despised, it is simply rejected because it is not true. All the evidence points in that direction. Also, it is worth noting that astrology exists within a commercial context where services are exchanged for money, and many astrologers use astrology to gain a lot of money and gain a platform by tricking people, which is completely unethical.
Their main line of attack on astrology is the claim that it simply doesn't work, that there's quote-unquote no evidence that it has any efficacy at all. But that's not true. For example, take the work of the husband and wife researchers Michel and Françoise Gauquelin. They were psychologists and statisticians who started out as astrology skeptics until they tested it. They collected thousands of birth charts of professional people. But what they found is that there were clear, statistically significant correlations between the position of certain planets in their charts and their professions. For example, they found that athletes were more likely to be born just after Mars had risen or culminated in the sky. Jupiter's position correlated with actors, Saturn with scientists, and the moon with writers. What's more, the findings were replicated by other researchers. In other words, the Gauquelins proved that some kind of astrological effect was indeed real.
This is a very important mistake that many astrologers make. It is very important to understand that correlation does not equal causation. Even if there were correlations between those separate events with Mars and the elite athletes, that doesn't mean that Mars caused the rise of elite athletes. Also, the Mars effect is mainly disputed in our current age just because it was a very weak signal. It was a very small deviation from randomness. It merely showed that maybe there's a correlation between Mars and those events, but it didn't clearly demonstrate that Mars is the cause of those events or the rise of athletes, etc. And many people have shown that the researchers that replicated those studies were biased just because they wanted to confirm their belief. Also, since you're unwilling to state other studies that show that astrology is false, I will paraphrase two studies that are very famous for doing exactly that. The first one is the Carlson study, which was executed in 1985. It was a double-blind study, which means both parties had no idea what was going to happen. And what they did was they got a lot of professional astrologers and they gave them birth charts and profiles of personalities of a lot of people that were there. And the astrologers had to match the personality profiles only knowing their zodiac signs, their horoscope, and other astrological signs and data they could use. And it was revealed that in the end, astrology is not better than chance. It is quite literally no better than guessing. Also, another study that is significant and is more recent is the Greenberg study in 2024, where 152 professional astrologers had live data and charts of people, and they did a similar experiment, and once again they proved that it was no better than random guessing.
Now, I will admit that it's generally quite difficult to prove that it does work. And that's for a good reason, because astrology is fundamentally a science of consciousness. It makes claims about how conscious experience changes in concert with the movements of the planets, and it deals fundamentally with archetypes, narratives, and the interpretation of meaning. Those aren't things that can easily be studied in a lab, as science tends to expect. What's more, to make concrete predictions requires an astrologer to find confluence between multiple signals using multiple techniques, and so it's very hard to test. Nevertheless, there is a journal called Correlation, published by the Astrological Association of Great Britain, that regularly publishes peer-reviewed, data-driven research into astrology. Of course, to the skeptics, none of that counts either.
I'm sensing a slight category shift. We went from physical, testable, repeatable evidence for astrology into philosophical claims about consciousness and the fact that this is the reason astrology isn't easily proven. It's because it's a science of consciousness, and those things are not easy to prove. But the thing is that if you claim it's scientific, you need to have repeatable, testable, experimental evidence. This is the core of the scientific method. And not only have we not seen any experimental or repeatable or any testable evidence from astrology, all the evidence points in the other direction, in the completely other direction, which shows without a doubt that astrology is not supported by science. It is completely against science. Also, we must clarify something. Yes, the journal Correlation is indeed a real journal that rarely posts our astrological studies. But the thing is that they only post astrological studies. No one can scrutinize their work because every peer reviewer is simply in the same echo chamber as them, which means that it is not a reliable journal. If it were posted on a journal like Nature or another prominent scientific journal, there would be discourse, debate. You could actually prove something else is true or debunk a claim a scientist has made But in those types of journal, those closed journals, I would say, there isn't any room for debate because everyone has the same mindset to prove astrology.
Even though it hasn't held a central place in our culture for many centuries, it still, to this day, seems to get certain people extremely worked up.
No. So the answer is no. None of this has any effect on us at all.
And I think that emotional reaction is something of a tell. Because when people react emotionally to something which, on the surface of things, doesn't have much impact on them, it's a pretty reliable sign that there's something about that thing that they find threatening.
To be completely honest, your reasoning seems to have gaping defects in logic, because you went from testable evidence to emotional reactions just because Neil deGrasse Tyson feels strongly about this subject doesn't mean that astrology is actually true. It may be the fact that astrology is affecting a lot of people. It tricks people into giving money where they shouldn't. There are a lot of explanations which you seem to ignore for some reason. Either you ignore them or you really do not perceive the possibility of them existing. Either way, it is very shallow thinking, and it demonstrates that you don't really want to prove astrology. You just want to affirm to all the people that already believe in astrology.
Astrology is science's embarrassing twin. In the distant past, astronomy and astrology were one. Ancient people worked hard to understand the movement of the planets so that they could make astrological predictions. Many of the most famous proto-scientists in history were actually astrologers, people like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo. Science actually emerged from Renaissance occultism and Hermeticism, which taught that the cosmos was governed by laws and forces that could be manipulated by a magician. In Europe, around the middle of the 17th century, at the opposition point of the last 500-year Pluto-Neptune cycle, there was a decisive shift from the reign of Renaissance magic and occultism to the reign of science.
Well, it is historically accurate that many proto-scientists used astrology as well as astronomy. History contains numerous examples of widely accepted explanatory systems that were later replaced by models that actually explained how the world works. For example, people used to believe in geocentrism, that the Earth was at the center of the universe. This was later disproved. Also, the flat Earth model, that was also disproved. Those things today seem laughably wrong. But though the people that lived in those times didn't have the necessary knowledge to prove that these things were wrong, they made assumptions, they made theories about the world that were not really accurate. And to be clear, I'm using the word theory in the colloquial sense, not the scientific theory scientists use. Those people took the stars, which we know are nuclear reactors light years away, and gave them meaning, made shapes out of the sky and gave those meaning, so that they feel they know something, so that they have an explanation for the world, because it's a very deep human desire to want to know things. That's what science is all about. It comes from the ancient word scienza, which means to know. Humans always wanted to know things, to understand things, but we didn't always have the necessary tools or observations to actually understand how the world works. And we made mistakes along the way. It's quite natural to make mistakes. The bigger mistake is that some people still cling to those mistakes, like astrology, flat earth, geocentrism, and many more.
Around this time, in 1660, England's Royal Society was founded and science was institutionalized. And around the same time, the influential French thinker René Descartes was publishing his dualistic philosophy, which split mind from matter. The realm of the mind or the spirit was given to the church, which hated astrology, but the realm of matter was seen as the domain of science. And so in this light, astrology, being a science of hermeneutics, of the interpretation of meaning, was judged unscientific and effectively banished from the academy. Now, to be fair, it was this split that enabled scientists to focus completely on understanding the mechanics of matter, and this did serve to expand our understanding of how certain aspects of reality work, but not all of them, and arguably not the most important parts.
It is true that in this period there was a significant shift towards the scientific method and testable and repeatable evidence, but it is not true to frame it as astrology being banished, or that questions about consciousness, the philosophy of mind, and interpretation of reality were gone or disappeared. That's simply not true. Philosophers continue to debate, to talk about the philosophy of the mind, if there was a duality between mind and matter. Those debates continued for centuries. It's just that astrology was left behind because it didn't have any merit, and people started to realize, and when I mention people, I also include scientists, that there was no basis for astrology. They didn't stop talking about the mind and consciousness. They just shifted their focus on things they could actually prove, while not ignoring other issues.
Living in a dark, spiritless, meaningless, mechanistic cosmos exacts a great cost from the soul. And so, at an unconscious level, I suspect that could be why astrology provokes such rage in people. It's as if they're unconsciously thinking, well, I'm living in a meaningless cosmos, why should you get to escape it? Misery loves company.
I find a lot of things wrong with this particular section of the video. Firstly, you cannot possibly know that every single person has that emotional rage you describe. Secondly, there's no evidence that this emotional rage exists. And thirdly, you can be quite certain that the majority of scientists and people that don't believe in astrology simply know that it is not based on evidence. And it is pretty nihilistic to think that just because the stars and planets don't affect your life specifically, that it follows that the universe has no meaning or your life has no meaning. You're basically making it impossible to live without astrology. You're making it impossible to live without your belief. But this is not logical. Life does not have an inherent meaning, in my opinion. We create our own meaning. I find meaning in the fact that I can explore the universe, that I am a bunch of atoms that are exploring the universe. The fact that I have consciousness as an emergent property makes me extremely lucky. And I have other pursuits in my life except knowledge, relationships, friendships, family. All those things are very important to me, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. You don't need astrology to live a fulfilling life. And you certainly don't need to believe in something when all the evidence points in the other direction.
The idea that astrology strips people of free will is still used to attack astrologers, that the stars incline and they don't compel. Regardless, at various times in history, astrology has had to change form or disguise itself to avoid persecution, but it's still almost completely absent from the academy. Very few thinkers who want to be taken seriously dare to admit that they believe in astrology. Richard Tarnas and Jason Georgiani are a couple of prominent exceptions to that rule.
If we want to remain consistent, we must acknowledge that anyone who believes in astrology can engage in any toxic, illogical behavior and claim it's caused by their zodiac sign or their horoscope. There's nothing stopping them, and most people who believe in astrology proclaim that they are a certain way just because the stars are aligned that way. So, when you do that, you don't face responsibility. It's a way for people to not face their wrongdoings, their mistakes, their bad behavior, and to hide behind astrology and the stars. But the truth is, the stars have no say in your behavior, nor do the planets. The first is a nuclear reactor that is burning for millions of years. The latter is simply a rock or a gas giant. Also, I looked up the two people you said, Georgiani and Tarnas. Georgiani had very unusual beliefs about space aliens convincing people to commit a genocide. Yeah, and Tarnas believed in the Greek mythology and Prometheus.
We've just lived through a period of 3 or 4 centuries in which the scientific establishment told us that magic wasn't real, that spirit wasn't real, that all there was matter. But this is and always was a magical cosmos, and even though most people don't realize it, this world is awash with magic. Always has been. The current Pluto-Neptune cycle, which began with conjunctions in 1891 and 1892, was a time of scientific apotheosis as well as an occult revival. And I think that it's about the reunification of science and spirit.
You made a lot of unfalsifiable claims such as magic, spirit, and there is no evidence for such things, and science disregards them because there's no evidence to suggest they're even possible. Also, no, the cosmos hasn't been magical ever. There's no logic to support such a statement. Also, I wanted to touch a topic you talked about, Pluto and Neptune cycles and the conjunction of those two planets. A problem with astrologers is that they don't realize space is big. A conjunction is when two planets appear close to each other. Keyword appear. They are not indeed close to each other. They are miles, thousands and thousands of miles away from each other. A similar logic appears in the retrograde motions of Mars and other planets. In reality, there is no such thing as retrograde motion, and it completely goes against any laws of physics. A planet cannot simply go backwards in its orbit without a reason. In reality, we just pass Mars in our orbit, and it appears that Mars goes a bit behind, but that doesn't mean Mars goes backwards in its orbit. That's like saying when you pass a car, the car suddenly went the other direction. That doesn't make any sense. In reality, you passed the car because you went in front of it and you continued accelerating past it.
It's about society rediscovering magic, but from a new baseline of skepticism and empiricism. Consider, for example, the growing awareness of the reality of psi phenomena, UFOs, life after death. and so forth. But magic is everywhere in much more mundane ways. The magician is, among other things, a manipulator of consciousness. The famous mage Dion Fortune defined magic as the science and art of causing changes in consciousness in conformity with will. And this world is absolutely awash with efforts to manipulate our consciousness. Just take a look around the modern urban landscape or the online one. The slogans, the images, the logos. These things are, in essence, tools of spellcasting.
I mean, logos that are used for marketing or spellcasting. Yeah, I find your reasoning very flawed, to be honest. And there's no basis for what you claim. You're simply saying things that are flattering to people that already believe this narrative.
Viewers released a video entitled Remote Viewing Klaus Schwab, in which they did just that. They did a psychic investigation of the former head of the World Economic Forum. The work was done double blind, meaning that viewers were not told the identity of their target, and neither was the person who gave them the target number. Nevertheless, one of the viewers, Dick Allgaier, was able to draw this picture of the target. Yes, that's Klaus Schwab, all right. Assume for a moment that people in power are indeed using astrology in secret. You might raise an objection to my argument that they're trying to monopolize this knowledge, because you might well point out that astrology is actually pretty popular today, and that to this day you can find horoscopes in newspapers across the world. So is astrology really suppressed? Well, I have a theory about those newspaper sun sign horoscopes. And in the bonus section of this video, available for members of the channel, whether here on YouTube or the website, I explain my theory on why sun sign horoscopes could well just be one big psyop. But my larger point is that until quite recently, astrology was kept in a particular place. It was tolerated among the masses, but strictly rejected by the intellectual class, even though people like J.P. Morgan thought it had a lot of value. And even though astrology seems to be booming right now, that's still basically the place that we find ourselves in. And I think there's another major reason for that, and it's this: astrology is an extremely powerful tool for snapping people out of the spell of materialism.
It really saddens me that we have gone from trying to prove astrology with testable evidence and studies to philosophical ideas that astrology isn't as easy to prove as other things in science, and now we have finally arrived at conspiratorial thinking. The fact that some people believe that people are using astrology because it's actually a very good tool is ludicrous. Astrology has zero basis. It is completely against science. And the fact that some people fall to this rabbit hole is completely against everything I want to believe. It's against everything I want to believe in about humanity.
The ideal subject of this late capitalist society that we live in is an atomized human being. It's a person who's disconnected from their roots, from family, from history, and from those around them. It's a person who has to rely on paid services as support networks, not family, friends, or community. It's a person who works hard, but spends all their money on the products pushed to them. It's someone who doesn't take pleasure in the things in life that are free, which are, of course, the best things. I think that this society doesn't want people who understand that life is inherently valuable and meaningful. Such people are liable to see through the nihilistic sickness at the heart of this culture. They're not good consumers, and they may even pose a threat.
This is a very good example of the complete reversal of reality that comes from conspiratorial or pseudoscientific thinking. Life doesn't have an inherent meaning, from what we can tell. But that doesn't mean life is pointless. In fact, it's more pointless if you base your whole life and meaning to things that you can't actually prove. You base your life on the fact that the planets and the stars affect your life, even though the stars are billions of times further away than the planets, etc. There are so many reasons. If I were to make a video about debunking astrology, it could be 3 to 4 hours long. There's so many things that are completely wrong about astrology. The worst part is that people actually fall for this. They fall for this. Unfortunately, some people don't have the critical thinking skills to see through those chains of thought. It's completely hopeless to see people thinking that their lives have no meaning if they don't believe in pseudoscience.
Correct. And here's where astrology comes in, because I think it may well be the fastest, most powerful tool for proving to people that their lives are indeed meaningful, and for snapping them out of the materialist spell. Because what astrology will show to you in a very vivid manner is that meaning isn't something that exists purely in your head. Astrology connects the meaning that you perceive internally to the wider cosmos. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Consider the red planet Mars, which has long been associated with war and bloodshed. Let's say that transiting Mars conjoins your moon and you experience an accident. Let's say that you get in a fender bender and the whiplash gives you a sore neck. At a purely material level, that sucks, of course. Let's say that you're aware of the astrology of the moment. Well, then you can recognize that you've experienced the energy of the Mars archetype at the precise time that the sky says you should. And so this unpleasant experience suddenly becomes a more meaningful one. The astrology has woken you up to something much greater than yourself, to the tapestry of meaning that's enfolded into the fabric of conscious life on Earth.
The last thing I would like to say is that it really saddens me and annoys me that people believe those things. Most people that fall for pseudoscience or conspiracy theories do so because they like the story. They like a story that makes them feel better about themselves. Either they feel more intellectual, either they feel happier, but it's all fake. It is logical to say that life may not have an inherent meaning, but you don't have to lie to yourself because you want a meaning set in stone. It may not exist. The evidence, and from what we can tell, is that there is no inherent meaning. We create our own meaning. And life can be disappointing, that's for certain. But that doesn't mean we should lie to ourselves or convince other people to listen to lies like this. And I know a lot of people are gonna say, come on, this isn't so serious. Astrology is just for people that want to discuss some things over coffee about how they are Virgo or the retrograde Mars is going to affect them this month. But it's not just that, because there are people like him. He has a platform. He has convinced people that they are better off believing in what he says than by trusting and proving to themselves how reality actually works. We should cherish that we have the ability to know what's true and what's false, and we shouldn't fall for this kind of nonsense.